Welcome, everyone. I'm going to hand over to Khatu, who will take you through today's presentation.
All right, thank you, Cara. Good evening, everyone. My name is Khatu. I am an occupational therapist at Changes. So today's topic will be covering the impact of addiction on family members. So just understanding your role as the family members, right? Thanks, Cara. Okay, so the first thing I think we need to look at is that addiction is a family disease, right? So this is because it affects more than just the person using the substances. So there's an emotional distress, a financial strain, and a relationship breakdowns that affect both the family as well as the addict. So family members often take on unhealthy roles to cope, which we'll go through later on in the presentation, but there's also a loss of trust and constant worry about the addicted loved one, right? So we'll also go through understanding why your role is important as a family member. So this is because recognizing unhealthy patterns allows for your own healing. And it's also important to balance support with your own self-care needs, which is something that we often forget about as family members. So we'll also talk about how you can support recovery without enabling the addict in your family. So there's common feelings that the family members may face. So the first one would be confusion. So this is you asking yourself and confused, why does the addict not just stop? Why can they not just put down this drug or this substance, right? There's also a feeling of fear and helplessness. So fearing what if they overdose. There's also guilt, blaming yourself for this addiction, or also exhaustion. So feeling like you cannot keep living like this because of the emotional turmoil that it takes on yourself as well. All right. Thank you, Cara. Okay, so first, I just want us to look at the emotional and psychological impact on family members. So, Kari, you're more than welcome to jump in if there's anything that you want to add, right? So, the first one is chronic stress and anxiety. So, constantly feeling on edge and anticipating a crisis because you've seen this before. Maybe there's been multiple relapses as well. Also, experiencing sleep problems, experiencing headaches because you're so stressed out about what this addiction has done or the impact that it's had on your family. Right. So the second one is guilt and shame. So feeling these feelings. So for example, if you're a parent feeling responsible for your child's addiction, if you're a spouse wondering if you caused this addiction, right? And as a sibling feeling neglected or overshadowed because of your brother or your sister that is the addict in the family. Then we look at anger and resentment. So these are the unmet expectations and broken trusts from the addict. So broken promises as well. Then you also feel a sense of resentment towards the addict for disrupting the family, and conflict between family members over how they've handled the addiction as well, right? And then there's also feelings of emotional exhaustion, so coming from the family. So feeling hopeless and feeling drained, and also a lack of motivation to take care of your own personal needs. So this is you forgetting about taking care of yourself, so your self-care, right? Just focusing on fixing this addict. Then there's also the fear and uncertainty. So constant worry about whether they'll relapse, constant worry about whether this person will be able to survive this addiction, right? And also a fear of stigma and judgment from other people. So you may start isolating or not engaging with other family members because of the embarrassment. I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Cara.
Yes, sure, absolutely. I think what I would just like to mention in terms of the emotional and psychological impact is that these feelings are kind of like on an ebb and flow where one day I might feel angry and resentful, and the next day I feel this guilt and shame. Um, Angry at my loved one for what they are causing in my family, and then one day I might feel bad for the way I felt, or for the way I reacted in certain situations. And I think what I just want to point out is that it's not an abnormal occurrence. Um, if we look at that last point there, the fear and the uncertainty, sometimes we just don't know how to deal with what's going on in our family and the dynamic. So we can chop and change, feeling one way another day and another on the next day. Yeah.
Definitely. All right. So I just want to look at a little bit at the effect on the family dynamics, right? But before we look at the roles that the family members adopt in the addicted household, I just want to talk a little bit about the dysfunctional family role. So it's not in the slide here, but I just want to talk a little bit about it before we go on to the roles. So as we said before, addiction disrupts the natural balance in families. So it is a family disease. So it causes members to take on specific roles which are written there that we'll go through a little bit in a bit. So because addiction is described as a family disease, it's because it doesn't just impact the person using the substance, but it also reshapes the family dynamics, right? So this forces the loved ones to adapt in unhealthy ways. And this disruption occurs because of several reasons that I just want to talk about a little bit. So it shifts focus away from healthy family functioning. So instead of maintaining stability and maintaining communication and emotional support, the family's energy shifts towards managing the crisis, which is the addiction. So, for example, a family that once prioritized spending time together now revolves around monitoring the addicted person's behavior as well. So it also creates role confusion in the family. So families operate like systems. So each person usually has a role. So maybe there'll be a provider or a caregiver or a nurturer in the family. But this addiction forces the family members into dysfunctional roles, which disrupts the natural order of relationships, right? So, for example, a child might start parenting an addicted parent, or a sibling may take on excessive responsibility to compensate for the chaos that's happening because of the addiction. So then it also erodes trust and communication. So the addicted individuals often lie, they often manipulate or hide their behavior, which leads to secrecy and leads to deception in the household. So family members stop expressing their feelings out of fear of conflict or making things worse, right? It also replaces the stability with chaos and unpredictability, like we mentioned before. So, healthy families thrive on routine, predictability, as well as security. But addiction introduces uncertainty. It also introduces financial stress and emotional turmoil. Right. And then it also increases emotional and psychological stress, which we touched on. So family members are constantly worried. So they constantly in fear and they're constantly anxious over their loved one's safety and their well-being. So for example, the addict's mood swings or their aggression or withdrawal from the drug may cause emotional instability within the family. So family members or the child of the addict may start feeling guilty or blaming themselves for the substance use, right? And then there's also breakdown of boundaries and personal identities. So in this case, family members start focusing so much on the addict that they neglect their own needs. So that you neglect your own dreams and your own goals. So this is where codependency develops, which we will talk about a little bit later in the presentation. So family members tie their sense of self-worth to fixing the addict. Right. So you might give up things like your hobbies or your friendships or even your career to sort of save this addicted partner or family member. Like we mentioned, it triggers financial problems. So the addiction, sorry, leads to job losses, reckless spending, may also cause legal trouble because of the stealing as well, right? So it may drain the family's savings. You may need to take out a loan, right? Or even pay legal fees to help the addict. It also causes isolation from extended families and friends. So families dealing with addiction often experience shame. You often experience stigma, leading you to withdraw from family circles, right? So friends and relatives may distance themselves due to discomfort and due to frustration, also just not wanting to be judged by other family members, right? And this also normalizes toxic and dysfunctional behaviors. So over time, this chaos that's happening around you becomes the new normal, right? So then the lying, the enabling, the covering up for the addict becomes the routine behavior. So an example of this would be a family might excuse the addict's behavior. So maybe just saying it's just the drugs talking instead of holding this person accountable. Right. So before we look at the roles, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add, Cara.
Nothing from my side for now, Katu, thanks.
All right. So not just looking at the roles that the different family members may adopt in the addicted household. So the first one is the enabler. So this is the person. So I'm not saying that every single family has a person who adopts these roles, but it's just something that I want you to start looking at and try to start to see if you identify with any of these roles that are mentioned here. So the first one is the enabler. So this is the person that tries to fix or protect the addicted person. So they cover up consequences, and they often feel exhausted from carrying the burden of the responsibility, right? So, for example, it would be a spouse making excuses for the addicted partner's job absences. So, you start lying to the employer as well. And the unintended consequence from this is that it enables the addict by shielding them from the reality. So, you're sort of protecting this person from the reality around them, right? The second one is the hero. So the hero is the perfect family member who tries to make up for all the chaos that's happening around in the family because of the addiction. So this person would often excel in school or in their career to overcompensate for the family struggles. So, for example, it would be the eldest child, sorry, who overachieves to bring a sense of normalcy to the family, right? And the unintended consequence from that is that they suppress their own emotions, and this can lead to anxiety or even burnout from this family member, right? So you're not actually talking about how this addiction has affected you. You're always trying to work hard to sort of mask what's actually happening in the family, and that can take a toll on you, right? And then, so looking at the third one, which is the scapegoat. So, with the scapegoat, they draw attention away from the addict by misbehaving. So, it's often seen as a problem child in the family, but this is actually a way of them expressing their pain. So, for example, it would be a rebellious teenager acting out to distract from the family issues. So, it's either to distract the family members or to distract themselves from what's actually happening because of the addiction. And the unintended consequence from that is that they can end up in trouble either at school or even with the law because they're trying so hard to distract themselves from the chaos that's happening around them because of this addiction. Okay. Then the fourth one is the lost child. So this lost child is this child that withdraws from the family interactions to avoid stress. So it talks about the lost child, but it doesn't actually have to be an actual child. It could be, the father, anybody that's part of the family, right? So they become emotionally detached and avoid forming deep relationships in the family. So for example, it would be a quiet sibling who isolates themselves to avoid the conflict. And then the consequence that could result from that would be feeling invisible or struggling with your self-worth because you're not actually dealing with what's happening. You're trying to avoid the situation all of the time, right? And then the last one talks about the mascot. So this person uses comedy to deflect from the family pain. So they often struggle with anxiety that comes from dealing with the addicted family member. So an example of this would be a child using humor to lighten the mood in the tense household. And the unintended consequence from that would be that you're masking your emotions and preventing yourself from actually healing from what's happened, right? Um, thank you. Okay. So I just want to talk a little bit about the effects on the family dynamics. So looking at the communication breakdown. So there's often a communication breakdown in addicted families. So there's often trust issues. So there's lies, there's manipulation, the broken promises, right? That take away from the honesty. So maybe you may find that the addict in your family has been promising that they're gonna stop and they never stop, and it just gets worse over time. So this just causes a loss of trust in the family, right? There's also avoidance of difficult conversations within families, right? So the fear of confronting leads to silence. So you're so scared to confront this addict behavior. It just leads to people just, the elephant in the room. You're not addressing the elephant in the room. We know that there's a problem, but we all just keeping quiet about it, which doesn't really help the situation. And also feeling the blame and guilt. So family members turn on each other instead of addressing the issue, right? Just because it's so hard to deal with as well. And there's also the financial struggles. So addiction often leads to lost jobs. So either the addicted loved one or one of the family members may lose their job because they're trying so hard to fix the situation. There could be medical bills that were unintended because of this addiction, right? Family members also may be financially exploited to support the addiction. So this ties in as well with the lies, right? So I just need to borrow this much and I'll pay it back, right? And you just keep giving the addicted loved one. And this is also a form of enabling the person, because if they ask, you're always giving it to them. All right. I don't know if you have anything to add, Cara.
Yeah, I think just based on those family roles that you mentioned, I think it's quite important to look at just how much energy we may spend changing the entire dynamic of our family to either enable or to hide or to keep the outside look with an addict in the family as normal as possible. And how much of that time and energy you're spending focusing on that person. I think in treatment, when we look at that, I call it deflection, right? With when I'm talking to the addict. And I think it's quite, you know, important to maybe reflect on how you weren't looking at yourself at that time, whether intentional or not. But what of your own life, your own feelings, your own thoughts, your own needs have you completely been ignoring? Just to reflect on. Thanks, Katu.
Okay, thank you. So we spoke a little bit about codependency a bit earlier on in the presentation. So I just want to touch a little bit on it again. So just looking firstly at what is codependency, then we'll look at how that could be harmful and looking at the signs of codependency as well, right? So codependency is a dysfunctional relationship where a family member becomes overly involved in the addict's life, resulting in what Cara just said, neglecting your own needs as well, right? So the family's sense of identity becomes tied in trying to fix the addict. So your entire identity is just focused on trying to fix this problem, right? And it keeps both you and the addict in and the family, sorry, trapped in unhealthy patterns, which we'll talk about a little bit. So this can lead to emotional exhaustion and resentment as well. So it's not to say that you're not supposed to be part of your addict's process in recovery, but just looking at how it can lead to unhealthy habits, and it could also lead to enabling behaviors as well, right? So just the signs to look out for in terms of codependency would be, for the first one would be difficulty setting boundaries, right? So feeling responsible for the addict's actions and their emotions, and also prioritizing the addict's needs over your own personal well-being. So we are talking a lot about this in this presentation. It's just to emphasize, because we often forget about ourselves in this at this time. So there's also a fear of abandonment or rejection if you don't help the addicted loved one. So saying yes to whatever they need because you're so scared that they're gonna abandon you, or they're not gonna be in your life, which could also be an enabler, because now you're just enabling this addiction, right? And they're not actually taking responsibility. And also the constant need for approval and validation from the addict, right? So those are the signs that you are developing codependency. Okay, and we can just look at the next slide. So, thinking about why codependency is harmful, right? So, like I said, it prevents the addict from taking responsibility. So, you're always saying yes to their needs. You're always, if they need something, you're always there, but they're not actually taking the responsibility of the things that they've done, what the consequences that have happened because of their addiction, right? It also creates emotional exhaustion for family members, and it leads to resentment and unhealthy relationships because you're constantly there. They're not giving back what you're giving. So that could lead to resentment as well. All right. Thanks, Cara. Okay. So now just looking at breaking free from codependency and how to overcome codependency. So, firstly, you have to recognize the unhealthy patterns, right? So, looking at, for example, am I trying to control the addict's behavior? Okay, so the first step in breaking free is identifying whether codependency is present in the relationship. So, questions that you could ask yourself is, firstly, do I prioritize the loved one's needs over my own? Secondly, do I feel responsible for their emotions or their decisions of the addict? Or do I cover up their mistakes to prevent consequences? So this stops them from actually taking responsibility for the things that they've done. If you constantly feel the need to cover up their mistakes, right? So for example, that thing where we were talking about how you lie to the or cover up to the employer about where the the addict was if they don't pitch at work. Also, do you feel anxious? Do you feel guilty or afraid when setting boundaries with this addict, right? Also, do you also believe that you can fix or save them? Do you take full responsibility for saving this person? And also, like we mentioned, neglecting your own well being because of their addiction. So, those are the questions that you can ask yourself. So carrying on with how you can overcome the codependency. So also setting healthy boundaries. So for example, saying if they ask you for money, saying no, I will not give you money for drugs, but I will help you find treatment. So getting them into treatment, right? Um, Also talking a little bit about how to set boundaries. So the first thing is to be clear and to be direct. So state your boundaries without guilt, which is something that could be difficult. But just like we mentioned, just saying no, I will not give you money for drugs, so you're being clear about it, and then you follow through on the consequence, right? When you're setting boundaries, um it loses power if you're not enforcing what you're saying. So if you continue using at home, you will need to leave, and actually following through with that boundary that you set, so that they know that this is the consequence if I actually overstep this boundary. Also detaching from the guilt. So you need to remember that setting a boundary doesn't mean that you don't care. So it means that you value yourself too. And limiting enabling behavior is also important. So this means stop making excuses or covering up for their destructive actions. So the next one is just focusing on your self care. So this could be engaging more in the hobbies that you used to engage in, going to therapy, social support. So this is also includes the family support and practicing mindfulness as well. So joining support groups, like I said. And the most important thing I think is just accepting what you can and you cannot control. So you can support the addict, but you can't force them to recover, right? And one of the hardest but the most important steps is breaking free from codependency, is accepting that you cannot control and you cannot fix the addict, right? That's just taking too much responsibility on yourself. So they need to actually learn to take responsibility. So I just wanted to touch a little bit on the mindset and the shifts for letting go. So accept what you can and cannot change. So first of all, so you can support your loved one, but you cannot force them to recover, like we mentioned. Also understanding that love does not equal sacrifice. So love means offering support in healthy ways. It doesn't mean sacrificing your happiness for someone else's addiction. And also allow the addict to take responsibility, like we mentioned. So you offer emotional support, but don't shield them from the consequences, and avoid rescuing them and making excuses or fixing their mistakes. Right. Cara, is there anything that you would like to add in terms of that?
No, not right now in particular, but I think just reiterating the importance of boundaries, the points that you made in terms of making something quite clear, and of course following through with it.
No.
It is one of, I would say, the toughest parts of even your loved one's recovery. They're also learning about how to set boundaries, and both parties being boundaried is really that first kind of step of walking away from codependency. I think boundaries are really, really important.
Okay, so just understanding your role a little bit in recovery, right? So this is the healthy ways to support your loved one. So the first one would be to encourage treatment, right? So most of your loved ones are in treatment, but so this is supporting them in terms of encouraging them to stay in treatment. Also looking back at the boundaries, I just want to talk a little bit about encouraging treatment. So they, for example, you spoke about the lying and the manipulating, right? So sometimes you need to set that boundary of, no, you're not going to come back home unless you finish with your treatment, right? And actually following through on that, like Cara said. So if your loved one knows that you're going to set a boundary, and that boundary is not going to be, you're not going to stick to that boundary, they're going to be able to manipulate you, right? They're going to be able to overstep that boundary, and it will make it easy for them to just leave recovery and not take responsibility um, for their own addiction and their own process, right? Also, the second one is stop enabling. So with enabling, you need to let, if no, although it may be difficult, which is something that, because we want to always rescue the addict, right? So this is talking about letting them experience the consequences of their addiction. So this looks like stop, for example, covering up for them, right? If something has happened, not covering up for the things that they have done, letting them take responsibility for the harm that they have caused as well, not constantly feeling the need to save them, right? And then also setting clear expectations, like we talked about, right? So this person has broken your trust. Looking back at the boundaries a little bit, but also taking care of yourself. So family members also need healing, and they also need support. So, an important thing to think about is that you cannot pour into an empty cup. So, if you are constantly trying to fix the problem, you're constantly there trying to sort of think about what you have to do in order to save this person. You're always taking out of yourself, but what are they giving you, right? So you need to let them take responsibility. All right. Okay, so I just wanna before that, I just want to talk a little bit about how you need to be patient and you need to be compassionate. So recovery takes time, and relapse is something that can be expected. So it's things that happen sometimes. And it's also important to educate yourself. So to learn about addiction, to learn about recovery strategies as well. And also creating a stable environment. So removing substances from the home as well, um, is also a thing that we need to take into consideration. So I just want to go through what we spoke about. So we spoke about that addiction impacts the entire family, not just the individual, right? We looked at that understanding your role leads to healthier relationships, and it also leads to healing. And it's also important to seek help, emphasizing again setting boundaries and focusing on your own self care, and also addressing codependency, which leads to stronger and healthier family, right? So I just have a discussion at the end, so that there's three questions that I have that I'll just like us to engage a little bit, and get input from the family members or whoever's is listening in the presentation. So we spoke about the family roles, right? So I just want to ask if anybody has experienced any of these family roles personally, right? So just we can just discuss them in this presentation as well. And also thinking about the boundaries that you have struggled to set with your loved one. So it's not about specifically talking about your loved one or name calling. So we're just talking about in general, what boundaries have you struggled with, right? And what positive steps can have you taken for self-care as well, right? So I just want to engage a little bit with the family as well. So maybe we can just go. Cara, do you mind going to the slide on the roles, please?
Sure.
Thanks.
Oh, I've missed it. There we go.
Okay, so this was the slide on the roles, right? So we spoke a little bit about the enabler, the hero, the scapegoats, the lost child, and the mascot, right? So just reading the examples as well. Does anybody in the family or in the participants, have they experienced any of these roles?
It's always a work in progress, right? We're always learning, we're always adjusting, we're always seeing what's working now and what might not be working now. And I think what always stands out for me, especially when family support comes up, um, is you mentioned seeing some of these things in your childhood, teen years, and even bringing them into adulthood. And that's something so similar that we talk about in treatment in terms of addict behaviors as well. How were my addict behaviors present even before I picked up? Um, and I think how what I want to relate it to is how this recovery journey is um, so something that can be so well used for everyone and anyone, and how I really want to encourage all family members, friends, loved ones who have been affected by someone who is addicted or abusing substances to seek your own support, to find your own kind of sense of recovery. There's so many principles, so many aspects of this program that can help you as well. So thank you, Mel, for sharing that.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate on what Mel said. So she said she didn't even know what self-care was, right? Um, and that it took a long time for her to even start thinking about setting these boundaries. I think it's beautiful that now you actually consider yourself, that um, you you don't answer your phone until you're actually done taking care of yourself, right? So we talked about that thing of pouring from an empty cup. So if your cup is constantly empty, what is there to actually give if you're not actually taking care of yourself? So that was very valuable. Thanks for that. Shared about the boundaries, Greg, which was very valuable, about how difficult it was for you to set a boundary. So the point of setting a boundary is so that you stick by it, right? It is difficult to set boundaries, but it also stops you from enabling the addict, right? It also allows them to take some responsibility, like Greg mentioned about how he knew that if he RHT'd, there's nowhere to go. So there's nowhere else for him to go. So he's forced to stay in treatment, right? Yeah, so thanks for that, Greg.
Mm. And I think if I can just add on to that as well, um, to me it sounds a lot like going through those three C's, right? That we learn in family support in terms of, I didn't cause it, having to come to terms with that. I didn't cause my loved one's addiction, especially as a parent and a child. Um, I can't control it. As much as I've tried and tried and tried, put all my effort into maybe this time they'll stop. I've done this and I've put this in place and I've done that, and I will keep him locked up in his room, and we cannot control it, right? Third one is you can't cure it. That's something that even your loved one has to come to terms with. It's a chronic disease, cannot cure it. I can't just be fixed, right? Um, and then I think really what this presentation has spoken to is that fourth C, of I can contribute to it, right? And that I can contribute to my loved one's addiction or their recovery. So I can be that enabler, that makes excuses for them, that covers up for them, or I can contribute to the recovery and, set boundaries and help support them in what they need, and make sure that they stick to their own boundaries as well. Um, Maybe start my own recovery journey to get that started as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Want to ask, looking at the second point that we talked about, so we just spoke about the roles that the family members have experienced, but also thinking about does anybody want to share on boundaries maybe that they have struggled to set, or any positive steps that they have taken as a form of self-care in this instance?
I think if I can just add a note, something that I like to share in, working in the treatment center as well. If we're looking at self-care, and I always, before I start talking about this, I always say don't take it too seriously. Um, but when it comes to the one thing the one aspect of active addiction um, that we might want to take with us into recovery is that of selfishness. Um, and obviously, active addiction is for your loved one is a very selfish time. A lot of what they do is to serve them. A lot of what they say is to serve them, right? Serve, I mean, to get, to use, to hide, to recover from using, right? Um, and that's the kind of selfishness that is rife in active. And looking at the third question that Katu's got out here for us about self-care, that's why we need to take selfishness into recovery with us, right? It's your recovery, it's my recovery journey and mine alone. And when I look at the self-care that I'm doing, I need to purposefully put time aside for myself to make sure that I'm looking after me so that I don't end up in the hospital because I've started neglecting my own needs and I'm stressed out and I'm having heart palpitations and so on and so forth. Um, just want to read a comment in the chat box as well. As there's, I think therapy and information is an important form of self-care and taking time to do something for self, reconnecting with friends, etc. I know I need more therapy, right? Therapy, support groups, very much of what your loved one has been going through in treatment, is very important forms of self-care, I believe. And sometimes it might be a bubble bath, sometimes it might be reading that book that's been sitting on the shelf for a while, and sometimes it might be that active form of going out and seeking help, right? Um, so just to stress the importance of that.